prayers, hopes, and self-consecration. You know, because requiring other people to initiate you into the spiritual path, except as, witnesses, is, priestcraft, right? Brighter times seem to have arrived. The vengeance so confidently promised in the close of 32 is described as nearer at hand. In fact, the first 3 verses seem to belong much to 32 as to the present chapter. They remind one of the choruses attending saints are immortals in 29, perfectly germane to the connection, but referring in the third person to a speaker who closes the last chapter with a first and who begins again with a first in verse 4. The propriety of a division of chapters here rests upon the fact that the thought comes to a climax at 32:16, beginning afresh at 33:4. Whether Zarathustra, or the chief composer, whatever his name may have been, composed these 3 verses relating as they do to himself and put them into the mouth of another, or whether their grammatical form indicates another author is difficult to determine. And I would say some of this is from an earlier language, and some of it's putting in stuff into gaps, for the most part. I doubt very greatly whether either the expressions I approach, I offer, etc., are the words he will act, let him be in Asha's pastures, are at all meant to express more than some modern hymns which use I and he. Both are in constant employment in anthology, with no change in the person indicated. I and thy servant are merely verbal variations. Here, however, the change is somewhat marked by the allusion to the chastisement of the wicked, just previously mentioned in 32:16. 1. It is to be noticed that the strictest canon, with the original, as indeed with the latter Zarathustrians of the Avesta, was the primeval law. Unquestionably, the precepts, understood as following from the dualistic principle, were intended, that is to say, no trifling with any form of evil, least of all with a foreign creed, was to be tolerated. Ahura has no share in the evolution of anything corrupt. We may even add that he had no power to prevent either sin or sorrow, although he possessed all conceivable power to oppose them. According to these fundamental laws, then, the Ratu is said to act as sternly severe upon the evil as he is beneficent to the saint. Now, about this, the problem of evil, well, if a choice is allowed and people choose that, and particularly if the choice is really, really rewarded if you do well and otherwise, well, again, all the fault lies on the beings that are choosing the evil and ignorance, right? 2. The fierce hostilities hitherto pursued are more than justified. The injury of the wicked by denouncing planning or by physical violence is on a par with advising the good. They who pursue the enemies of her are actually operating in love to God and sacrificing to religion itself. 3. And accordingly, the reciter is made to pray in this immediate connection for a sincere and useful friend, Vahista, to the believer, to whichever class he may belong, whatever chief, allied peer, or villager, a friend spiritually enlightened, Vidas, and according to Ahura's prescript 29:2, keen, persevering, and brave in the cultivation of cattle, Thwakshanga Gavoe, let such an one as this, so asked for by the Lord himself, so needed by the kind, let him, he prays, be supported in this holy toil for us. Let him till and tend, not in the pastures of our valleys only, but in the spiritual pastures of the divine benevolence, where the mystic kine is grazing. And so we're, referring to, the nature that doesn't have, the incarnate things that don't have the free will, while we're on their side too. So, it's not some anti-nature faith. No taking off the natural man. 4. Taking up in particular, I who, of 28, the composer returns to the first person, continuing in that form with a little exception until the last verse, which naming Zarathustra in the third person implies, if it is not an addition, whichever it may be, that Zarathustra had been the speaker throughout, as it is highly probable that the author who uses this I who is the same who uses it in 28. And if we may take verse 14 as fair evidence that Zarathustra is the speaker here, we acquire some additional grounds for believing that the person who wrote, if we can apply such an expression to the author, the words to Zarathustra and to us, as well as to Vistaspa and to me, and to Frashaastra and to me, was universally recognized to be Zarathustra himself, composing a piece to be recited by another, and as if in response to the expression of verse 3, recalling that although a Vahista, a best one, to some of each class, verse 1, he was no contender to the wicked. 43, verse 15, he begins a prayer which is only completed by its Isya in verse 6, and which gathers force by each preceding profession of fidelity. And true to a practical dualism, he first abjures the leading sin of disobedience to God and of arrogance, discontent, and dishonesty towards man, accompanied as it seems to have been with neglect of all important duties to the cattle who shared the sanctity of the soul of their representative, and perhaps it is the practical severity of dualism as opposed to the more facile line of the opposed religion, which is the cause of that high reputation of the Persians for veracity, which was grouped with avoiding debt by Herodotus among the virtues of the race. 5. I, he goes on to say, are to imply, I who not only abjure disobedience, insolence, complaint, and lying, but especially invoke the great genius who is obedience himself, obedience towards God, thee, endeavoring as I do by this abjuration and prayer to obtain, not to 100 autumns of booty and glory, but to a long life in the kingdom, which was established in the spirit of divine benevolence, and paths, not only for the war cart or for commerce, but to those rigidly straight paths of moral purity in which Ahura dwells. 6. I, he adds once more, who am thus thine actually invoking Sapeya, invoker, straight line, like the paths, Erazus, I am seeking with longing. Kaya, am I doubling the Y? Ka-ya, to know that from the best spirit, by Spenta Menu, animated once more by that best mind, to know what shall we regard it as bathos, when we read that he thus, with cumulative urgency, prays to know what the best spirit thought should be done for the recovery and perfection of the fields. If we turn back to 29.1, we see that the identical word vastrya describes the original want of the kind soul. It was vohu vastrya, which should be implored as her salvation, and it was the sacred agriculturist who alone could afford it, and who, as the diligent tiller of the earth, always remained the typical saint, and as his usual deeds in reclaiming, irrigating, and cultivating land were justly ranked among the first services of a human being, and as the last preparation of the gathered grain was perhaps humorously, but yet pungently, said to make the Davas start and shriek and fly. See Vendidad 3:32 and 165. I don't know what's, and as further, a life of the fruits of the earth to this day constitutes the main difference between those who live by murderous theft and those who live honestly in nearly the same regions. I think we may not only see no bathos here, but on the contrary, admire the robust sense of this early religion, and say that the knowledge as to a true policy in the Department of Agriculture was one of the wisest possible desires, and the most of all things worthy of a sight of Mazda and of consolation with him. How the fields had better be worked, and how the people could best be kept from bloody freebooting, as aggressors are as victims. This involved Ahura's righteous order, benevolence, power, and piety, the four energizing immortals all at once, and this only could secure the other two rewarding personifications, welfare and immortality. 7. Having prayed for that which is the first virtue of civilized existence, work. Verez ye idyae. He proceeds to further petitions. Come ye, he beseeches, in the Vedic fashion, of course, using the language of the one tribe that was left out of the Vedic, right? Come ye, O Ahura, Asha, Avohu Mana. I behold the attentive monarch, the leading Magavan, as he listens to my instructions with the other chiefs, and the thronging masses, and let too the sacrificial gifts pour in for offering and worship. 8. He rests at no bare mortality for the simple multitude. He knows too well the human foible. Therefore he acts with vigor for sacrifice in him. 9. Encouraging the two pious chiefs whose souls go hand in hand, he prays that an influence like that of the eternal two might bear their spirit to the shining home of paradise, it having attained to perfection by the help of the best mind of God within it. For Ma'inu, in this sense, compare 44:11, 10. Well, okay, before getting into 10, the whole 6th thing, it's like, well, okay, if it matches up with Christianity, it's like, but if it doesn't, it's like, it really says that. It's like, oh, they could have meant it literally. They couldn't have had a different idea of the afterlife. They really kind of meant more of this life. It's like, okay, not really, but 10. Asking of Mazda to grant his love, or by his will, all the happy phases of life, which have been, or which shall ever be experienced. He prays that their bodies, that is, their persons, as separate, accountable individuals, compare narem havahyae tanuya, might flourish in the graces of the good mind, the holy sovereignty, and the sacred order, till they were blessed with the usta, the summum bonum. Remember, Zarathustra, some of the same roots. So usta is not the same as ushta, but ushtra, but keeper of the golden or the ruddy, those cute camels that exist in this one area of Afghanistan, basically was what it says. Anyways, 11. Here he prays, and I didn't think that there could be a cute camel until I saw this breed, or species, I guess. 11. Here he prays all the grand abstractions, piety, the righteous order, which alone can push on the settlements, the good mind of God within his people and his kingdom, and turn to their mental ears and listen, and listening to pardon. 12. And specifying the one central object of desire, the thrift law, the Avesta of the Ratu, the Sa'oshant, he asks Ahura to arise to his help, and give him spiritual strength by sustaining him through the inspiring righteousness and the good mind in an effective invocation. 13. With a spirituality still deeper than his Semitic colleague. What Semitic colleague? He acts not to see the person of God, but his nature, and especially to be able to comprehend and bring home to his mind what the sovereignty of God implies with its blessed rewards, and he acts of piety as first acquired, practiced, and then speaking within him, to reveal the gnosis, the insight that is the religion. Now, Abraham wasn't a Semite. He was from Ur. So if we're going to put him 1700 to 2000 BCE, and Abraham about, 1800 BCE, to match in with the rise of the Marduk cult fleeing that, in a way. That wasn't entirely the point, but you still would say he's maybe a 4. But there's reason to put it even further back that the Parsis could be right. Some of the mythology matches in with this, 8,000 years ago or whatever it is. Something that I forget exactly what date it would be put to, but yeah, it was quite a bit of time ago. So acting like they're contemporaries with the biblical prophets of one or the other, and no, before that. 14. After the fervent language of the previous verses, we may accept verse 14 as a legitimate continuation. Its Zarathustra may mean I, just as David is used by the psalmist for me, and the language can mean nothing but a dedication of all that he is and has to God, his flesh, his body, his religious eminence, the obedience which he offers in word and deed, inspired by righteousness, and the kingdom which he has succeeded in saving and blessing. I do not think that I have at all exaggerated the grasp and fervor of this section. Less could not be said if the words are to be allowed their natural weight. And we move on to the translation here. And remember, I'm going to try to have a whisper voice for the parentheses. So, 1. As by the laws of the primeval world, so will our spiritual chieftain act. That chief besought for by the kine, and named as Zarathustra by the Lord. Deeds most just he will do towards the wicked, as towards the righteous, and towards him whose deeds of fraud and righteous deeds combine in equal measure. 2. Yea, he will act with justice, but with vengeance for he who does evil to the wicked by word, or with thought and plan, and who does therein not dally, but toils laboring as with both the hands are he akin, who admonishes one for his good. Such as these are offering a gift to their religious faith in the love and with the approving view of Ahura Mazda. They are offering to consciousness, to conscious. 3. And so may it be. O Ahura, let the man who is the best towards the righteous saint, whether the Lord's kinsman or as a village laborer with allied peer of the master, having light and endowed with energy for the cattle, a rat too such as Ahura sought to satisfy their wail. Let such an one be for us in the work field of the righteous order, in the pastures of thy good mind. 4. And I beseech for thine instruction, I who will abjure all disobedience toward thee, praying that others likewise may withhold it from thee, I who abjure the evil mind as well, the lordly kinsman's arrogance, and that lying sin which is, alas, the next thing to the people, their most familiar fault, and the blaming allies' falsehood, and from the kine, the worst care of her meadows, the crime of stint and labor. 5. I who, abjuring these sins, call earnestly on thine obedience of all assisting guardians, the greatest one for our help, gaining thereby long life in the realm of thy good mind, incarnate in our tribes, and paths that are straight from their righteous order, wherein Ahura Mazda dwells. 6. Yea, I who, as this thy faithful priest, invoke thee through my righteousness, now seek with longing from thy best spirit, and with that best intention of mind, to know what he himself thought of the working of our fields. Therefore, because I abjure the evil mind and all disobedience, arrogance, falsehood, O Mazda, would I beseech of thee for a sight of thee and for consultation with thee. What is thy will and mind? 7. Come ye then to my best regulations. Come to my men and my laws. You know, men as in humans. Remember gender neutrals and all that. To my very own Amazda, and let them see through the righteous order and thy good mind, which thou wilt bestow in thy drawing near, how I am heard before the rich giver in the assembly of thy worshippers. Yea, come ye, and let the manifold offerings of worship be manifest among us. Arouse ye and help our zeal. 8. Come ye, and show me the worthy aims of our faith, so that I may approach and fulfill them with thy good mind, the offering, O Mazda, of the one like you, are the words of praises offered with righteousness, and give ye as your offering of grace to me the abiding gifts of your immortality and welfare. 9. And let one like those, O Mazda, bear on to thee the spirit of the 2 leaders who cause the holy ritual truth to flourish. Let him bear them to thy brilliant home with preternatural insight, and with a better mind, yea, let him bear that spirit on as a fellow help in furthering the readiness of those in their holy work, whose souls go hand in hand. 10. And not for these alone do I pray, but for us as well. All prosperous states, in being which have been enjoyed in the past, which men are now enjoying, and which shall be known in the future, do thou grant me these in thy love, yea, cause our bodily and personal life to be blessed with salvation through thy good mind, thy sovereign power, and thy sanctity. 11. And, O thou who art the most beneficent Ahura Mazda, and thou who art Arama'ete, our piety, and also the righteous order, who dost further on the settlements, and thou the good mind, the sovereign power, hear ye me all, and have mercy for every deed which I do whatsoever. 12. And thou, O Ahura, do thou thyself arise to me through Rama'ete, give me power, O most bountiful Spirit Mazda, through my faithful appeals and offerings, and for my righteousness, grant me mighty strength and thy thrift law through thy good mind. 13. Arise to give me power, and then for grace and a wide perception, that I may view its depth and extent. Do thou reveal to me thy nature, O Ahura, the power of thine attributes, and those of thy holy kingdom, and by these the blessed gifts of thy good mind, and do thou, O bountiful piety, show forth the religious truths through thy righteous order. 14. Thus in offering Zarathustra gives the life of his very body, and he offers likewise, O Mazda, the priority of the good mind, his eminence gained by his holiness with thy folk, and he offers above all his obedience to thee, in deed and in speech, and with these thine established sovereign power. And we're still in the comments of the doctrine of dualism, so let's see exactly which one we got here. The La Rasto Vegin end, long E on the other, but not E, it's the because I is E, they suffer judicial blindness, a common idea in the Gathas. Compare who holds them from the side of truth. And this is the note, the righteous choice on one side, the beguiled on the other, but the beguiled is the following note. The root is verse 6. The root is indicated by va, munik, val, mansan, frift. I can see no escape from the above rather adventurous rendering. See also dafshnya hentu in chapter 53, verse 8. Perhaps the idea of injury here preponderates over that of deceit, since we have impaired their power. The choice between a preterite or an improper subjunctive is also difficult, possibly so that we may fatally deceive them. Possibly nominally deception came upon them, even. Okay, and later in that verse, the debating in the council, Quran talks about the secret chiefs, so there's different ways to talk about that. So, This recalls Vendidad 1945, where the demons assemble in a council to consider the event of Zarathustra. Oh, well, different secret chiefs. I thought it was the heavenly chiefs. Okay. The secret chiefs of the demons. Okay. People in their demonology, a lot of it's just made up or whatever, but just because you can linguistically figure something out doesn't mean that that's, what spiritual beings are called or whatnot. Okay, so it's not the angels. It is, okay, I spoke too soon. In verse 4, the vehistem mano equals heaven. Heaven afterworld, I guess. The subject of gasat has the proper place in the nominative in the sentence. So, just like the Vedic usage. That they might disease, so literally the lives of those who had not been tempted or fallen. And, well, that's one of the things that happens sometimes is the people who live impure lives, it passes over. With so much less wrongdoing to feel the impacts. So don't think, well, this person has lived this life and they deserve it, but this other person made the mistake once. Well, maximum consequences are to be considered a possibility here. The Pahlavi Vimar Nido Ahvan I Marduman, and brackets we have Aig, 3 missing characters, Evatman, Ashem, and Suta'an, Ahu Kin End. Narang Yaseng has Ye, Nigagner, Buvanam, Manushyanam, and Hubschman has Dirch, Ihen, Plagen, Uber, das, Laben, das, Menschen, zu bringen. Okay, so the lives of immortals, the verbatim, I guess, of the verse, of these 2 spirits, not aright, may choose the da'avas sense. These we have beguiled, or have injured. The questioning ones that came, he, in order that he might be chosen. Subjunctive middle, he the worst mind, thereupon. The furious rapine, they rush together in order that Iena, they might disease or ruin the life of man. Are to him, verse 7, upon this Ramaete, some unnamed benefactor, hardly to us the Pahlavi has, Avo Valman, but ne'er has only Tetraka. Observe the Ahma'e in chapter 43:1 and in chapter 47. And remember, these things weren't just, private instructions to Zarathustra and maybe those around him. But there's reason to think it wasn't, as the talk of prophets to follow that we've seen, it wasn't the eternal guidance, so there was some limitation, and ever strenuous, and for these, we have a footnote here saying, the root on or in the Pahlavi freely, Pavan Astubi, he seems to have thought of Nam and A Priv. Keherpem is feminine. Anma may be a neuter in a position. Otherwise, we must accept ma as a suffix. Or can keherpem, corpus, be a neuter here? The clothing of the spirits with corporeal natures enabled them to advance in the development of moral qualities by self-restraint and pursuit. As has been observed in the summary, no Pravashis appear in the Gathas. Have we here possibly an indication of the pre-existence of souls? If Ramaete gave a body, it may be inferred that a period elapsed between the acts of the 2 spirits and this. So the pre-existence thing, it's not just what's the mean in LDS, but it goes way, way back. And as for these, let's be the last still in verse 7, the bodies are to be given to the saints as the first, to be inferred from Yast 29:89. And let us remember that saint doesn't mean what it may mean in certain context. They're not entities that we address our prayers to and then they go, they intercede for us. They would have naturally interceded for the good cause as we're interceding for the good cause. And if we're worthy, then it counts, but it's not, we're praying through them or something like the Catholics do. And okay, it's the first creation, so 7 verbatim. To this, to us, and with Kshatra came, with Mana Bahu, with Asha and Arama'ete. Thereupon a body continually gave. Arama'ete, the strenuous. Arama'ete are the body, a vigorous and strenuous thing. Of these are to thine, to let it, the body, be as thou tamest in creations, the first. And what else can be the subject of sasti? And okay, does the good mind utter its command? And the lie into the two hands of the righteous order of verse 8, we have observed the pronounced personification of righteousness as a matter of course. The ultimate sense is more commonplace, as is in the case with all poetical matter. Into the hands of Asha is the same as to say, into the power of the servant of God. But would this be a proper mode of rendering a line real through rudely primitive poetry? Such renderings are commentary rather than translation. The Pahlavi may be rendered as follows. Well, a lot of the Bible, as the generations go on, even when you're looking at the Aramea, Hebrew, whatever you want to call it, you have different linguistic periods. And the Pahlavi may be rendered as follows. But the Christian side of the Bible, even if it's the same Greek, But anyways, this is rendered as follows. Thus also, in that creation, in the final body, hatred comes to these haters and sinners, that is, the avengers shall execute chastisement upon them. And therefore, Harmazd, what to thee is the sovereignty. By that so possibly shall Bohuman give a reward. Through these, Harmazd, through the religion of Harmazd, when one is instructed in righteousness, that is, as to the interest of the pious, then the drug is given into one's hand. The drug who is a harmok, otherwise the Ahura Mazdas, or those on the side of Ahura Mazda, right? And I guess that's okay.